Hello. Tonight we travel back to a time before horoscopes and personality quizzes, before anyone argued whether being a Leo made you dramatic or a Virgo made you organised. Back then, the stars weren't symbols of who we are. They were living beings, divine stories, and sometimes divine mistakes, glittering across the night as eternal reminders of what happens when gods meddle too much and mortals dream too high. So, before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there tonight. Now, dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let tonight's journey unfold around you. Long before anyone read their daily forecast, the ancients looked up at the same stars we do now and saw something much more alive. The constellations weren't just pretty patterns. They were chapters of a celestial epic. Every glowing dot was the echo of someone's triumph or tragedy. Some were heroes rewarded for their courage, others were monsters punished by the gods, and a few were both. In those early nights, the sky wasn't quiet. It pulsed with memory. The Greeks imagined Zeus arranging constellations like trophies. The Babylonians and Egyptians saw them as living symbols of divine power, maps of the gods' movements. Even before them, in the cradle of Mesopotamia, priests watched the stars as if reading the diary of heaven itself. To them, astrology wasn't superstition, it was survival. The stars decided when to plant, when to sail, when to fight. But behind every twinkle was a myth. And those myths weren't polite bedtime tales. They were bloody, passionate, and painfully human. Because what the ancients really did was project their own chaos into the heavens. They looked at love, betrayal, and courage, and saw gods acting them out above. That's why the sky became a mirror, a reflection of everything messy and magnificent about being alive. Take Aries, for example, a story of sacrifice and salvation, or Taurus, born from a god's dangerous desire, or Gemini, two brothers divided by death, each one frozen among the constellations, as if the universe couldn't bear to let their stories fade. But before we reach them, before the first sign ever rose, it helps to understand how all this began. Because constellations weren't born from whimsy. They were the result of a deep, almost fearful relationship between humanity and the unknown. Imagine being one of the first people to look up at the night sky with no streetlights, no city glow, just endless darkness. The stars must have seemed alive, shifting and breathing, whispering through patterns. When the moon vanished and storms came, the stars vanished too, and when they returned, so did hope. So people began connecting the dots. They saw lions, rams, twins, and scorpions staring back. They saw their myths play out in shining form, almost as if the gods were saying, "Remember us. Remember what happens when mortals forget their place." The ancients also believed that these celestial figures didn't just represent divine beings, they were them. The night sky was their eternal stage. Each constellation, a divine scar left behind after something extraordinary happened. The Babylonian priests were among the first to write these myths down. Around 3000 BCE, they charted the stars, not just for navigation, but to track divine moods. A bright star near Mars might mean a king's fortune was changing. A dimming constellation could foretell famine or war. For them, astronomy and mythology were inseparable, two halves of the same cosmic conversation. And from Babylon's beliefs spread the seeds of what we now call the Zodiac, a circle of life and fate, divided into 12 parts. The word itself comes from the Greek zoidiakos kyklos, meaning circle of little animals. Because indeed, most of them were beasts, fierce, noble, and often doomed. But as centuries passed, something curious happened. The old myths began to blur. The constellations stayed, but their stories changed with every culture that adopted them. The Egyptians saw in Leo the sacred Sphinx. The Persians imagined Virgo as Anahita, the goddess of the waters. The Greeks turned those patterns into epics of gods and heroes. By the time Rome inherited the heavens, each cluster of stars had lived a dozen different lives. And through it all, one truth endured. Every star was once a story. Even now, when we say, "I'm a Scorpio," or "You're such a Gemini," we're repeating the names of creatures and gods that once terrified sailors and farmers alike. The zodiac signs we treat like memes or mood labels were once divine warnings. They weren't about personality, they were about power, punishment, and sometimes mercy. And maybe that's why they still fascinate us. Because beneath the pop culture sparkle, something ancient still hums. The stars remember their origins, even if we've forgotten. If you look closely, you can almost imagine Zeus himself looking down from Olympus, deciding who deserves to shine forever and who deserves to burn out. You can picture Hera's jealousy sparkling faintly beside his arrogance. You can see mortals tiny, proud, foolish mortals etched across the sky for daring to reach too high. Every constellation, from Aries to Pisces, is a frozen moment of drama, a punishment that became beauty or a tragedy that found peace. Tonight, we'll walk that celestial path. We'll move sign by sign, story by story, through the entire zodiac and beyond it, to the one sign that was erased. We'll uncover the myths behind the stars, the strange and often cruel reasons these creatures were placed above us. And by the time we reach the end, maybe the night sky will look a little different to you. Not just a dome of light, but a graveyard of myths, a glittering map of everything the gods once feared to forget. So, let's begin where the circle starts, with the ram whose flight began the zodiac itself. Long before Aries became a fire sign on an astrology chart, it was a living creature, one born not of ordinary earth, but of divine wool and mercy. The story begins not in the stars, but on the ground, in a kingdom filled with jealousy and quiet despair. There once was a land ruled by a king named Athamas. He was a mortal man with mortal flaws, pride, impatience, and the fatal habit of listening to the wrong people. His first wife, Nephele, was no mortal at all. She was a cloud nymph, her very body spun from mist and light. From her came two children, Phrixus, a gentle boy with thoughtful eyes, and Hele, his bright and laughing sister. But like many old stories, happiness didn't last. The king's heart wandered, and soon a new queen took Nephele's place, Ino, a mortal woman with a beautiful smile and a heart that could turn to ice when she wanted something. And what she wanted was simple: to make sure Nephele's children never stood in her way. Nephele, sensing danger, watched her children from afar. Clouds gathered when she wept, rain fell when she feared for them, but she couldn't protect them forever. Ino began to whisper lies into the ears of the people, then the priests, then the king himself. She claimed that Phrixus and Hele had brought famine to the land, that their very existence angered the gods. Superstition spreads faster than truth, and soon Athamas, desperate to save his kingdom, agreed to a terrible act. The priests declared that the only way to end the famine was through sacrifice the children's lives for the harvest's return. It's hard to imagine that moment, two children standing on the altar, their father's eyes full of shame, the crowd silent with fear. But the myths say that just as the blade was raised, a shimmer appeared in the sky. Out of the golden light descended a ram, not an ordinary ram, but one shining so brilliantly it seemed woven from sunlight itself. Its fleece glowed like molten gold, its horns curved with celestial perfection. This was no creature of the earth. It was a gift from the gods, some say. Hermes sent it. Others say Nephili herself prayed it into being. The ram bowed low before the children, and they understood. They climbed onto its back, holding tight as it rose into the air. Below them, the kingdom shrank into dust, the cries of the crowd lost in the rush of wind and light. It was the first flight in myth two small mortals carried by divine salvation. Phrixus and Helle clung to the ram's wool as it soared over mountains and seas, its golden fleece blazing a trail that sailors would one day follow. But myths, like life, rarely allow a perfect ending. As they crossed the great sea, later called the Hellespont, Helle grew dizzy. The world below was too vast, the wind too strong. Her hands slipped, and she fell, vanishing into the waters that still bear her name. Phrixus cried out, but the ram flew on. It carried him all the way to Colchis, a faraway land ruled by King Aeetes, known for both wisdom and suspicion. When Phrixus landed safely, he wept with grief and gratitude. He had lost his sister, but he had survived. To thank the gods and honour the ram, he did what many heroes in myth must do. He sacrificed his saviour. It sounds cruel, doesn't it, to take the very creature that saved you and give it up again? But in ancient times, sacrifice wasn't seen as cruelty. It was reverence, returning divine gifts back to the heavens. The ram's golden fleece was hung upon an oak tree in a sacred grove, guarded by a sleepless dragon. And thus began one of mythology's most famous legends, the quest for the golden fleece, the journey of Jason and the Argonauts. But that's another story. The ram, freed from its mortal form, was placed among the stars. Zeus, or perhaps Hermes, set its constellation in the sky so its bravery would never fade. Its light became Aries, the first of the Zodiac, the sign that begins the cycle. Astrologers later said Aries embodies courage, initiative, fire, the spirit that leaps first, acts before thinking, runs headlong into storms because it must. And maybe that's fitting, because the ram didn't hesitate. It saw danger and charged forward, carrying innocence to safety. Even when its story ended in sacrifice, it became a symbol of rebirth, proof that sometimes the act of saving is worth more than the life that follows. There's a quiet kind of poetry in that. The sky's first sign is born not of conquest or romance, but of rescue, not of pride, but of protection. Every time Aries rises in spring, it marks renewal, a fresh start. Like Phrixus stepping onto new land, trembling but alive. Even now, if you trace the faint stars of Aries, you can almost imagine that golden glow, a flicker of divine wool cutting through the night. Somewhere between the lines of myth and light, Helle still falls, the sea still roars, and the ram still climbs toward eternity. And for anyone who's ever had to be brave, or who's ever carried someone else's hope on their back, maybe that's why Aries remains the first, because someone had to take the leap before the rest could follow. The ancients understood that courage isn't about victory, it's about motion. It's about rising when the world wants you sacrificed. Aries is that spark, the first heartbeat in the Zodiac's long, strange story, the ram who ran so the rest of the constellations could shine. And as its golden light fades westward, another shape rises to take its place, larger, slower, and far more dangerous. The next sign is not a saviour, but a seducer, a bull with divine beauty and terrible strength, ready to carry a goddess across the sea. The night after the ram disappeared into the stars, a new shape began to rise, massive, patient, and glowing with quiet menace. The bull, but not the kind that snorts behind a fence or pulls a plough. This bull shimmered white as moonlight, with eyes that gleamed like polished amber and horns shaped like crescents of ivory. This was Taurus, the bull of heaven, but before he became a constellation, he was part of a story so strange that even the gods might have blushed to tell it. Our tale begins on the shores of Phoenicia, in a kingdom where the sea met the scent of blooming myrtle and the cries of gulls. There lived a princess named Europa, a woman whose beauty seemed crafted to cause trouble. She wasn't just lovely, she was radiant, kind, and curious, the sort of person who could make even gods pause mid-thunderbolt. And one of them did. Zeus, king of the gods, saw Europa one morning as she wandered the fields by the sea, gathering flowers with her handmaidens. He watched her laugh as she chased a butterfly through tall grass, her hair catching the sunlight, and something stirred in him. Not love, exactly. The gods rarely did love the way mortals do. It was more like obsession, that dangerous spark that always led to chaos. But Zeus had a problem. He'd made enough mortal women miserable to know that showing up as himself, a bearded thunder god with a reputation, wasn't going to help. So he chose a different form, a bull. Not just any bull, of course. He transformed into a creature so perfect that the air itself seemed to shimmer around him. His hide was pure white, his eyes soft as honey, his movements graceful as a wave. When Europa saw him, she didn't run. She laughed because this bull didn't look dangerous. He looked divine. The creature lowered its great head and knelt before her, as if inviting her closer. Europa reached out, stroked its muzzle, and felt a warmth that wasn't just animal. Her friends watched, amused, as the princess daughter of a king placed a crown of flowers between its horns. And when the bull lay down in the grass, she climbed onto its back. That's when the air changed. At first, the bull merely stood, turning toward the sea. But then, with a sudden surge, it charged straight into the waves. Europa screamed, gripping its neck as water splashed around her. Her friends shouted from the shore, helpless. The bull kept going, hooves finding impossible purchase on the foam, as if the ocean was solid beneath him. By the time Europa realized what was happening, the land was already a faint smudge behind her. The bull's muscles glowed with divine strength, and its breath came out in misty clouds. Then, somewhere in the endless blue, she heard a voice deep, thunderous, and far too familiar. "Do not fear, Europa," said Zeus. "No harm will come to you. You are mine now." It's hard to say what she felt in that moment: awe, terror, disbelief. The myths don't always grant mortal women the dignity of fear, but the sea kept carrying them, and eventually they reached an island called Crete. There, Zeus revealed his true form, not the bull, but the god himself, radiant and terrible. Europa's fate was sealed. She became one of his many mortal consorts, but her story didn't end in tragedy like so many others. Zeus, perhaps feeling some flicker of guilt or fondness, gave her gifts beyond any mortal's dreams. From their union came 3 sons: Minos, who would one day rule Crete; Rhadamanthus, a wise judge of the dead; and Sarpedon, a hero whose name would echo through the Trojan War. Europa's name would live even longer. The land where she was taken, Crete, became the cradle of a great civilization, and later, when sailors and scholars looked west beyond the Aegean, they named an entire continent for her Europe, the Stolen Princess. As for the bull, Zeus returned to Olympus, but the image of that shining creature remained. To honor the form he had taken, or perhaps to excuse it, he placed it among the stars. The constellation Taurus, broad-shouldered and enduring, became a symbol of power, sensuality, and stubbornness. In astrology, Taurus is ruled by Venus fitting, since Europa's story is steeped in desire and beauty. It's a sign of stability, of earth and endurance. But if you look deeper into the myth, you find something more haunting: the tension between trust and danger. Europa's bull looked safe. She climbed aboard willingly. And yet, that trust carried her into a fate she didn't choose. The story of Taurus reminds us that beauty can disguise power, and that not all strength is gentle. Sometimes, the things we find irresistible are also the things that carry us furthest from where we began. If you've ever met a Taurus, you might recognize that paradox calm on the surface, but capable of sudden, unstoppable movement when their heart or pride is involved. The bull endures patiently until it doesn't, and once it moves, nothing in heaven or earth can hold it back. In the stars, Taurus stands beside Orion, the great hunter. The two have faced each other across the sky for thousands of years, locked in a silent contest. Some say Orion hunts the bull forever, while others whisper that Taurus is guarding something precious, maybe Europa herself, hidden in the constellations beyond. And if you step outside on a clear night in spring, you can still see him. Look for the cluster of bright jewels near his shoulder, the Pleiades, 7 sisters who also fled a god's pursuit. Their light trembles beside Taurus's horns, like witnesses to all the messy beauty and danger that shaped the old world. It's strange, isn't it, that a story born from divine deception became a symbol of comfort and loyalty. But maybe that's the quiet lesson of Taurus. What begins in chaos can still end in steadiness. The bull may have stolen a goddess once, but now he keeps her memory safe in the sky, his massive frame holding the space between desire and devotion. And as his horns fade westward, another shape rises, 2 stars shining close together, so close they seem to share a heartbeat. They are brothers, twins of light and shadow, whose love defied even death itself. Above the sea, where the bull once swam, 2 stars rise together, bright, equal, and forever, side by side. Sailors once steered by their light, calling them the protectors of those who brave the waves. But long before they shone as the constellation Gemini, they were brothers, Castor and Pollux, whose love for each other was so fierce that not even death could break it. They were born from a story already tangled in divine mischief. Their mother was Leda, a queen of Sparta known for her grace and wisdom. One spring evening, as she walked beside a river, she saw a swan gliding toward her, pure white, impossibly beautiful. But this was no ordinary bird. The swan was Zeus, transformed once again, this time seeking not a princess like Europa, but a queen. The myths say he wrapped her in his wings, and from that strange union came not one child, but 2 sets of twins. One pair, Helen and Pollux, were born from Zeus, and therefore divine. The other, Clytemnestra and Castor, came from Leda's mortal husband, King Tyndareus. So, even from birth, the brothers were divided. Pollux, immortal and radiant; Castor, mortal and bound by time. Yet the two grew inseparable. They trained together, fought together, and even quarrelled together, as brothers do. But when danger came, they moved as one. The Greeks called them the Dioscuri, sons of Zeus, though only one truly was. Together they became symbols of brotherhood and bravery, protectors of travellers and warriors alike. They joined Jason and the Argonauts on their quest for the Golden Fleece, fighting side by side with heroes like Heracles and Orpheus. During storms, it was said that strange blue flames, what sailors later called street Elmo's fire, would flicker atop their ship's masts. The men took it as a sign the twins were watching, guiding them safely through the dark. But like all who live under the gaze of the gods, the twins' story couldn't end in endless victory. Their final adventure began not with heroism, but with rivalry over women, as it so often did in the old myths. Castor and Pollux had cousins, Idas and Lynceus, who were every bit as proud and reckless. One day, the four men set out together to steal a herd of fine cattle. Greed and temper tangled the plan, and soon the cousins turned on each other. In the fight that followed, Castor, mortal, fragile, was struck down. Pollux, invincible but helpless to stop it, fell to his knees beside his brother. He cried out to Zeus, begging for vengeance, for mercy, for anything to undo what had been done. And the sky answered. Pollux killed Lynceus with a thunderbolt thrown from his father's hand, but it brought him no peace. His immortality had become unbearable. What was eternity worth if he must live it alone? So Pollux did something no god or demigod had ever done before. He begged to share his immortality with his brother. "Father," he said, "let me die, or let him live. We were born together, let us not be divided now." Zeus, moved by the purity of that love, offered a compromise. The brothers could share their existence, one day in Olympus, one day in Hades, trading places forever. Neither would know eternal rest, but neither would face eternity alone. And so it was. When Pollux descended into the underworld, Castor rose into the light. Then, as the sun set, they changed places again, an endless exchange of day and night, life and death. Eventually, even the gods pitied them. Zeus lifted them both into the sky, placing them side by side among the stars, forever united, forever divided, twin lights shining through the darkness. That's why, to this day, Gemini is marked by two bright stars, Castor and Pollux. They look almost identical to the naked eye, but astronomers now know the truth mirrors the myth. Pollux is a giant star, still burning strong, while Castor is actually a system of smaller, mortal suns bound together by gravity. Science, it seems, never stopped telling their story. Astrologers say Gemini is a sign of duality, curious, quick, full of contradictions, talkative but thoughtful, playful but restless. In one moment, the life of the party. In the next, silent and introspective. It's the sign of the twins. After all, two souls forever switching places, light and dark, in constant dialogue. But beneath the modern meanings lies something older and far sadder, the fear of separation. The myth of Gemini isn't about mischief or wit. It's about connection so deep it defies the laws of life itself. It's about the ache of knowing someone so completely that your soul doesn't know how to exist without them. Even now, when sailors see the twin stars rise above the horizon, they whisper prayers for safe passage. The Romans believed that when Street, Elmo's fire, danced on a ship's mast, the Dioscuri were near, watching, protecting. The twins had become guardians not just of each other, but of all who faced peril together. And there's a strange comfort in that. The sky doesn't show us heroes who never die. It shows us brothers who refuse to live apart. So, when you look up and see those twin lights shimmering, remember that even the gods had to make room for love like that. Because just beyond Gemini's glow, in the faint shadow of its light, another figure waits small, easily overlooked, but carrying a courage that rivals any hero. A creature whose story began not with triumph, but with loyalty so pure that even being crushed beneath a god's foot could not erase it. Under the bright twins of Gemini, a softer cluster of stars emerges dim, almost shy, compared to their blazing neighbours. Ancient sailors said you had to let your eyes adjust to see it properly, as though the heavens themselves wanted you to look closer, to pay attention to something small and easily overlooked. That faint constellation is Cancer, the crab, and like its subtle glow, Its story is one of quiet devotion of courage, so humble it's almost tragic. The tale begins, as so many Greek myths do, with Hera, queen of the gods, wife of Zeus, and patron of grudges that could outlast entire dynasties. Her fury was legendary, and her favourite target was Heracles, the great hero we now call Hercules. Hercules was Zeus's son, but not Hera's. He was the child of one of Zeus's many mortal affairs, a living reminder of betrayal. Hera hated him not only because he existed, but because he thrived. Every time mortals praised his strength or bravery, it was like a spark to her anger. So, she decided to test him not with quick vengeance, but with a slow, consuming trial. Driven to madness by her curse, Hercules committed an act so terrible that he could never truly atone for it. To purify his soul, he was condemned to perform 12 impossible labours. The second of these was to slay the Hydra, a monstrous serpent with 9 venomous heads, each one regrowing 2 more when cut off. It was during this grim battle that our unlikely hero, the crab, scuttled into the story. As Hercules fought the Hydra, the marshes of Lerna trembled with each of his strikes. The serpent's blood hissed where it touched the ground, its breath thick with poison. Hercules swung his club again and again, his muscles straining, his lungs burning from the fumes. The Hydra screamed a sound like steam bursting from the cracks of the earth. And far off, in the shallows, Hera watched. She couldn't bear to see her enemy triumph. So, in one of those small but telling gestures that reveal a god's heart, she sent help not in the form of another monster or storm, but a tiny crab, no larger than a dinner plate, crawling toward the chaos. The crab must have known what it was walking into. Still, it went. Maybe it wanted to please its goddess. Maybe it simply followed instinct, unaware of the battle's scale. Whatever the reason, the crab clambered across the mud, snapping its claws bravely, and attacked the hero's foot. Hercules barely noticed. With one quick step, he crushed it, just another casualty in his endless war with the divine. The crab's shell cracked beneath his heel. Its courage was over, almost before it began. But Hera saw, and for once her heart softened not toward Hercules, but toward her small, loyal creature. She lifted its broken form into the heavens and set it among the stars, granting it eternal life as a constellation. That's how Cancer was born, not from victory or vengeance, but from loyalty rewarded. It's easy to miss how quietly powerful that story is. In a world ruled by gods of thunder and heroes of strength, Cancer's tale is about something gentler, devotion, service, the kind of courage that doesn't come from pride but from love. The crab knew it would lose, but it went anyway. That's why, in astrology, Cancer became the sign of care, protection, and fierce emotional loyalty. It's ruled by the moon, the soft, watchful light that governs tides and moods. Cancer people, the astrologers say, are nurturers. They defend, they comfort, they remember, but they also retreat when wounded, curling back into their shells until the world feels safe again. And maybe that's the quiet wisdom of the crab. It teaches us that retreat isn't weakness. Even in death, it found immortality by protecting something greater than itself. The ancient Egyptians saw the same constellation not as a crab, but as a scarab beetle, another symbol of endurance and rebirth. To them, it represented the soul's journey through darkness, rolling the sun across the heavens like a ball of light. To the Greeks, it was smaller, humbler, but no less meaningful. There's even a bittersweet irony to its placement in the Zodiac. Cancer sits at the height of summer, marking the turning point where days begin to shorten again. It's the season of light giving way to shadow, of strength softening into reflection. The crab, always moving sideways, reminds us that progress doesn't have to be direct. Sometimes the path to survival is curved, cautious, deliberate. When the Romans later named the Tropic of Cancer the line marking the sun's highest climb, they honoured that same idea. At the moment of greatest brightness, even the sun must begin its slow retreat. Every ascent carries within it the promise of return. If you ever stand by the sea at night, watch how crabs move sideways, steady, careful, yet determined. That's Cancer's rhythm. Protect what you love, but don't let the world crush you under its heel. Even Hera's act of mercy, rare as it was, carries a strange tenderness. In honouring a creature that failed, she reminded both gods and mortals that loyalty matters, even when it achieves nothing, especially then. So, while Hercules went on to finish his labours and earn his glory, the crab remained in the sky, glowing softly, its faint stars forming the shell of something small yet eternal. Most people barely notice it, but then again, Cancer has never needed to be noticed to matter. Its gift is quieter, to endure, to care, to cling when everything else falls apart. And maybe that's why its light endures long after the thunder fades. As the stars of Cancer sink westward, the night brings a new shape into view, massive, golden, and magnificent. The crab may have been crushed, but the next creature roared so loud that even gods trembled. It was the lion whose hide no blade could pierce the beast that would make Hercules famous and immortalize terror itself. The night sky brightens again, and where the gentle cluster of Cancer fades, a new light flares bold, proud, and unmistakable. Its pattern forms the shape of a great lion, mane spread wide, head lifted toward eternity. This is Leo the lion, and its story is not one of loyalty or sorrow, but of ferocity and fame. Because before it shone in the heavens, this lion stalked the earth, a creature born not of nature, but of divine mischief. It was no ordinary beast, and no ordinary man would dare to face it. But then again, Hercules was no ordinary man. The tale begins near the hills of Nemea, a land where travellers had begun to vanish without a trace. Shepherds spoke in whispers of a creature that prowled by night, devouring whole flocks and leaving not even bones behind. Its roars echoed through the mountains like thunder, and when hunters dared to attack, their arrows shattered, their spears bent, and their swords broke against its hide. This was the Nemean lion, a monster said to be the offspring of Typhon, the storm giant who once challenged Zeus himself, and Echidna, the half-serpent mother of monsters. From such parents, no ordinary child could have been born. The lion's golden fur was impenetrable. No metal, no fire, no magic could wound it. When King Eurystheus assigned Hercules his 12 labours, the slaying of this lion was the first. It was meant as a punishment, a test, and if Hera had her way, a death sentence. Hercules set out armed with bow, arrows, and club, his great shoulders draped in a simple cloak, his eyes calm and determined. He had already faced many monsters, but none like this. When he reached Nemea, he found the ground littered with the remnants of courage, shattered spears, torn shields, and footprints that ended abruptly. He tracked the beast to a dark cave with 2 openings, and he could smell it before he saw it, that thick, metallic scent of blood and fur. He strung his bow, drew his arrow, and waited. Then, from the shadows, the lion emerged. Its mane glowed like molten gold. Its eyes were twin suns of fury. It was beauty and terror fused into one. Hercules loosed his arrow straight into the lion's chest. The shaft bounced off harmlessly. He tried again and again. Each arrow snapped against the creature's hide, falling uselessly at his feet. The lion roared and charged. Hercules barely dodged as claws raked the air where he'd stood. He swung his club with both hands, the blow echoing through the cave. The beast staggered, stunned but not slain, and then Hercules understood. No weapon could kill it. So he dropped everything and met the creature on its own terms, strength against strength. He cornered the lion in its cave, blocking one exit with boulders and entering through the other. The battle that followed was silent but brutal. The lion pounced, its jaws snapping around his arm. Hercules seized its throat and grappled with it, muscles trembling, breath ragged, the air thick with dust and heat. No arrows, no armor, just raw will. Finally, with a mighty heave, he managed to wrap his arms around the beast's neck. He squeezed until its roars became a growl, then a rasp, then silence. The earth itself seemed to exhale when it was over. But the real challenge came next. Hercules tried to skin the lion as proof of his victory, but no knife would cut through its hide. Even the lion's claws failed. Then, in a moment of frustrated genius, he used the creature's own sharp claw to slice open its skin. The very weapon that had terrified others became the key to its undoing. He draped the hide over his shoulders, the first hero's armor made not of bronze or gold, but of something far rarer, invincibility earned. The lion's head became his helmet, its golden mane his mantle. When he returned to King Eurystheus wearing the skin, the king was so terrified that he forbade Hercules from entering the city walls again. From then on, Hercules had to deliver proof of each labour from a distance which, if we're honest, probably suited him fine. Zeus, watching from Olympus, was proud, perhaps too proud. He placed the image of the lion in the heavens, immortalizing it as the constellation Leo, the symbol of power, courage, and defiance. Astrologers would later say Leo is ruled by the sun, radiant, confident, born to lead. Its people are said to burn bright, to crave recognition, to stride through life like they belong on a stage. And maybe that's fair, because Leo's myth isn't just about strength, it's about the need to be seen. Even Hercules, the mightiest of heroes, didn't slay the lion for sport. He did it to prove himself, to restore a fractured soul, to earn redemption. And isn't that a little like the sun itself? Always shining, but always burning something away to do it. Yet there's another side to Leo's story, one the ancients knew but rarely spoke aloud, because when the lion was placed among the stars, it didn't roar anymore. It became still, forever frozen mid-pride, its once living strength turned into a symbol. Immortality, the myth reminds us, is a beautiful word for never changing again. Still, for the Greeks, Leo's rise in summer skies marked a season of heat, harvest, and hardship. Farmers prayed for the lion's mercy. Sailors avoided the midday sun that carried its name. To them, Leo wasn't just heroic, it was dangerous. Too much fire, too much glory could consume as easily as it could inspire. And perhaps that's why the lion and the crab, the strong and the small, sit side by side in the Zodiac. Together they whisper an eternal balance. Courage needs tenderness, and pride must sometimes bow to care. As Leo sets beyond the horizon, its golden mane trailing into twilight, a softer figure emerges, a maiden holding a sheaf of wheat, her gaze turned down toward the earth. She is Virgo, the last goddess who loved humankind enough to stay until the world grew too cruel even for her gentle light. When the lion's golden light sinks into the west, the sky softens again. A gentler glow takes its place, the shape of a woman, graceful and still, holding a stalk of wheat in her hand. Her stars are delicate, scattered, and yet she's one of the largest constellations in the heavens. To the ancients, she wasn't just a woman, she was a goddess. the last one to walk among humankind. Her name changed with every culture that looked up and found her there. To the Babylonians, she was Shelah, the grain bringer. To the Egyptians, Isis. To the Greeks, she became Dike, or Astrea, the virgin goddess of justice and purity. But her story, no matter where it was told, always ended the same way with her leaving us. Long ago, before war had a name, before envy had sharpened its edge, the gods still lived among mortals. The earth was green and peaceful, the rivers ran clear, and humankind was young, the golden age, they called it. People didn't need laws or kings. They lived simply, working the land, sharing the harvest, and offering prayers to the sky in thanks. And walking among them was a goddess whose light made the crops grow tall and the hearts of mortals gentle. She was the daughter of Zeus and Themis, a being of fairness and order, born from the union of power and wisdom. She loved humanity, guiding them with quiet kindness. She taught them how to measure the stars and when to sow the fields. She was the calm after storms, the voice of conscience, the one who reminded mortals that goodness was possible. But the gods, as they often do, grew restless, and mortals, who once mirrored divine harmony, began to change. The golden age gave way to silver, then to bronze. Each age brought more greed, more pride, more violence. Men raised weapons against each other, and the sound of war reached Olympus. The earth, once fragrant with harvest, grew thick with smoke and ash. The goddess, the maiden, wept. She walked among the battlefields, her bare feet stained with blood, her golden robe torn by brambles. She begged mortals to stop, to remember the peace they had once known. But they didn't listen. The world had grown too loud for her voice. And so, when the Iron Age began, the age of cruelty and deceit, she could bear it no longer. The myths say she looked up at her father, Zeus, and said, "I will not watch them destroy what we built." Then she spread her wings of light and rose into the heavens. Her departure marked the end of innocence on earth. From that moment on, justice and purity existed only as memories and ideals to chase, never to touch again. The place she left behind grew colder, lonelier. Crops failed. People forgot how to live without greed. The goddess's absence became a hole in the world that even prayer couldn't fill. And yet, she wasn't gone. Zeus placed her among the stars as Virgo the Virgin, the pure one, her hand still clutching the stalk of wheat that once blessed the fields. That's why, when Virgo rises in late summer, the harvest season begins. Her stars hang low over ripened grain, as if she's still watching, still trying to help from afar. Over time, her story merged with that of another, Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, and her daughter Persephone. Some said Virgo represented Persephone herself, the maiden of spring who was taken to the underworld, leaving the earth barren until her return. Others said she was Demeter, mourning her lost child, her sorrow turning to starlight. In every version, though, Virgo stands for what was lost, a symbol of what happens when the world becomes too cruel for goodness to stay. Astrologers call Virgo the sign of order, care, and quiet perfection, the mind that sees patterns where others see chaos. They say Virgos notice everything, fix everything, and rarely ask for thanks. But if you look deeper into the myth, you see the cost of that perfection. The maiden is not serene because she knows peace. She is serene because she's learned to live without it. She's the one who cleans up the chaos left by others. The one who keeps working when everyone else has given up. She embodies devotion but also distance. The goddess who loves humanity too much to stop caring, but too much also to stay. The Romans called her Astrea, the starry one, and believed she would one day return when humankind finally remembered kindness. Until then, she remains in the sky, holding her sheaf of wheat, a symbol of patience waiting to be rewarded. Even her brightest star, Spica, carries that meaning. It literally means the ear of grain, glowing softly in the dark, like a promise that life will return. Farmers once prayed to her for good weather. Judges swore by her name. And when the night was clear enough, people would point to her shape and whisper, "That's where justice went." But the goddess's leaving also made room for something new, for the delicate balance between right and wrong to be weighed by mortal hands. Her scales, the legends say, didn't vanish when she did. They simply drifted beside her, suspended in the night. And those scales became the next constellation, Libra, the eternal balance between guilt and grace, fairness and fate. So, as Virgo fades into autumn, her gentle stars pass their burden onward into the keeping of the scales. The goddess of innocence may have left the earth, but her light still lingers, faint but faithful, like the conscience of the world. As Virgo's soft light drifts westward, her final gesture remains suspended in the heavens, a pair of shining scales, perfectly balanced. The ancients saw them hanging between two seasons, where summer's warmth meets autumn's cool breath. It was no coincidence that this was the spot where night and day shared equal time. This was Libra the scales, the only sign of the zodiac not shaped like a living being, but like a symbol, a reminder that the world, and every soul within it, must someday be weighed. These were no ordinary scales. They belonged once to the goddess who walked beside Virgo, sometimes her sister, sometimes her reflection, Dike, the spirit of divine justice. When Dike rose into the heavens, she left behind the last tool she'd used on earth, the golden scales with which she judged mortals and gods alike. Zeus himself had watched her weigh kings and peasants, heroes and beggars, with the same patient fairness. At first, the scales always tilted toward light. People were good, their hearts were kind, their choices pure. But as the world darkened, as greed, pride, and cruelty crept in, Dike began to see the balance shift. Each lie, each broken promise, each unpunished crime added weight to one side. The scales began to tremble, and she wept, knowing that once the measure tipped too far, the world would lose its harmony forever. And yet, balance, even when painful, must always be restored. In later times, poets imagined Zeus himself using those same scales in moments of fate. Before great battles, he would lift them high, each side holding the destiny of opposing armies. Whichever side sank, that army would fall. The scales did not lie. Even gods obeyed their verdicts. That image, the ruler of heaven quietly weighing destinies, carried through the centuries. The Romans, who saw Libra as sacred to the goddess of justice, depicted her blindfolded, holding those very scales. Not because she couldn't see, but because true balance must not favour what it recognises. Astrologers say Libra is ruled by Venus, goddess of love and beauty, and that's always surprised people. What does love have to do with justice? But perhaps Venus understood something subtle, that balance isn't about punishment, it's about harmony. True fairness must be as graceful as it is firm, like two hearts learning how to share a rhythm. In the ancient world, when the sun entered Libra, the equinox arrived, that perfect day when light and darkness were equal. Farmers took it as a cosmic reminder. Too much sun scorches the field, too much shade starves it. Life thrives in balance. But balance, like justice, rarely comes without cost. One story tells of a mortal judge named Rhadamanthus, a son of Zeus who was famed for his fairness. When he died, the gods chose him to help rule the underworld. There, he used the divine scales to measure souls, weighing not their deeds, but their intentions. The myth said a feather was placed on one side, the soul on the other. The lighter the heart, the closer one came to paradise. If that sounds familiar, it should. Even the Egyptians told of Anubis doing the same, centuries earlier, weighing the heart against the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth. Across civilizations, across pantheons, this symbol repeated a scale hanging between eternity and consequence. Maybe because, deep down, people knew that fairness wasn't divine, it was necessary. And Libra's constellation reminds us that balance doesn't mean stillness. Scales don't rest. They move, adjusting to every tiny shift. That's the secret of the sign, that justice isn't frozen perfection, it's constant recalibration. To the Greeks, this made Libra both beautiful and terrifying. They said when the scales were upset too long, Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, would emerge. She carried Libra's golden balance in one hand, a sword in the other. When mortals went too far, too proud, too cruel, too lucky, she would weigh their fortune and, if the measure demanded it, cut it short. The lesson was simple. Everything, even blessings, must have proportion. Perhaps that's why Libra became the midpoint of the zodiac, positioned between Virgo's purity and Scorpio's sting, between reason and passion, between order and chaos. And yet, for all its heavenly symmetry, Libra's myth is not about easy balance. It's about the struggle to maintain it. In one forgotten poem, Justice Deek herself speaks, "I hold the scales, but I am weary. For each good deed that rises, 2 sins fall against it. And though I keep them steady, I wonder how long can I?" It's a sentiment anyone living in the real world might understand. Trying to keep your inner scales balanced between work and rest, giving and taking, love and self, can feel divine and exhausting all at once. That's the quiet beauty of Libra. It doesn't demand perfection. It only asks that we try to make the world a little more fair, our relationships a little more equal, our judgments a little more kind. And maybe that's why Libra's light feels calm when you see it on a still autumn night. The stars of the scales don't dazzle like Orion or roar like Leo. They simply glow, softly, evenly, the sky itself, breathing in and out. But even the most careful balance can be broken. Legends say that as Libra set below the horizon, a shadow followed close behind a scorpion creeping out from the darkness. It had been sent by jealous gods to hunt a man whose pride had grown too heavy for the scales to hold. And in that clash between hunter and sting, between ego and vengeance, the sky itself would tremble again. When the even glow of Libra begins to sink below the horizon, a darker shimmer follows. It rises low and fierce in the southern sky, the curved tail, the claws, the faint burning heart of a scorpion. To the ancients, this was no quiet constellation. It was a warning. Because the scorpion's place in the heavens was not earned through virtue or sacrifice, but through vengeance. Long before it crawled into the sky, the creature had walked, or rather crept, upon the earth. And its story began, as so many tragedies do, with a man who thought himself untouchable. His name was Orion, the great hunter, the son of Poseidon and Uriel. He could stride across the sea without sinking, his head high above the waves. He was tall, strong, impossibly handsome, and, if the bards are to be believed, just as full of pride as he was of skill. He hunted not for food or sport, but to prove that no creature could ever best him. He roamed the forests of Chios and the hills of Crete, bow in hand, dogs at his side. declaring that he was the greatest hunter in the world, that no beast could challenge him. And one day, perhaps after too much wine and too little humility, he went further still. He boasted that he could kill every animal on earth. That was the moment the gods stopped listening with amusement and began to listen with intent. Some say it was Gaia, the earth herself, who heard him first, the mother of all living things, the silent watcher beneath his feet. His words stung her like an insult. To threaten every creature that crawled, flew, or swam was not just arrogance, it was blasphemy. And so, with quiet fury, she sent something small to remind him of his size. From the shadows, she called forth a scorpion, tiny, quick, almost invisible, a creature no taller than Orion's boot, but armed with a tail tipped in venom forged from divine wrath. It waited in silence, hidden beneath the leaves where the hunter strode, and when his heel came down beside it, when the earth itself trembled beneath his arrogance, the scorpion struck. One sting, that was all. Orion staggered, confused at first, then terrified. The poison coursed through his veins faster than any remedy could reach him. He fell to his knees, his bow dropping from his hand, and his dogs howled beside him as his strength fled. The man who had once threatened all of creation was undone by a creature smaller than his palm. The gods, watching from Olympus, did what they often do in moments like this. They turned the lesson into legend. Gaia, proud of her avenger, placed the scorpion in the sky, its tail still arched in triumph. And Zeus, moved by pity or perhaps amusement, set Orion there as well, but on the opposite side of the heavens. That's why, to this day, you'll never see Orion and Scorpio in the sky together. When one rises, the other falls. It's as though the hunter still runs, forever chased across eternity by the sting of his own pride. Of course, as with most myths, there were variations. Some said Artemis herself sent the scorpion, not Gaia. Orion, after all, was her companion for a time. They hunted together, laughed together, perhaps even loved each other. But love between a mortal and a goddess rarely ends without tragedy. In one version, Orion, emboldened by affection, tried to take what was not freely given. Artemis, betrayed and heartbroken, called upon Gaia to punish him, and the scorpion came. In another, her twin brother Apollo, jealous or protective, tricked Artemis into killing Orion with her own arrow. When she realized what she had done, she placed his image among the stars, and Gaia placed the scorpion as his eternal rival. Two truths can exist at once: love and vengeance, light and darkness, hunter and hunted. That is, after all, the nature of balance and the inevitable shadow of Libra's scales. Astrologers later gave Scorpio to the god of war and desire Mars, whose domain is both passion and destruction. They say those born under its sign burn deep rather than bright. They feel intensely, love fiercely, and when wronged, sting without warning. There's something magnetic about Scorpio's darkness, that mix of mystery and danger that draws you in, even as it unnerves you. But there's more to the myth than revenge. The scorpion didn't strike from malice, it struck from purpose. It wasn't cruel, it was correcting. The universe cannot allow unchecked arrogance forever. Even stars, after all, collapse when they grow too proud. And perhaps that's why Scorpio's brightest star, Antares, burns blood red, a celestial heartbeat, pulsing with both danger and beauty. Ancient astronomers called it the rival of Mars because its fiery glow mirrored the planet's own hue. To them, it symbolized the eternal contest between courage and consequence. When people looked up at the scorpion's curve in the night sky, they didn't just see death, They saw power restrained by patience, the sting always ready but never wasted. That's the deeper lesson of Scorpio. Transformation through endings. To sting, to shed, to rise anew. Some later poets even imagined that Orion and the Scorpion made peace, their chase becoming a dance across the cosmos. In spring, Orion dominates the heavens, his proud figure striding across the winter sky. But by midsummer, he fades, and Scorpio rises, reminding the world that strength, no matter how great, must make room for something else. It's the rhythm of the universe, creation, destruction, rebirth. And as the Scorpion's red heart fades toward the west, another shape emerges, a figure drawing a bow, eyes fixed on the horizon. The arrow glints faintly in the dark, aimed at nothing less than the stars themselves. This is Sagittarius, the archer, who once taught heroes, healed the wounded, and made a single, fatal mistake that would cost him eternity. When Scorpio's tail slips beneath the horizon, another constellation rises, bow drawn, arrow nocked, half man and half horse, frozen in a moment of divine precision. To the ancients, this was Sagittarius the archer. But behind that poised figure is not a hunter like Orion, nor a warrior of vengeance. The archer in the heavens was once a healer, a scholar, and a teacher, a being who suffered for wisdom and found peace only in mercy. His name was Chiron. Unlike most of his kind, Chiron was no wild creature. Centaurs were notorious for their drunken brawls, lustful tempers, and reckless abandon, the very embodiment of man's animal nature. But Chiron was different. He was born not from violence, but from a rare union of divinity and wisdom. His father was Cronus, the Titan of time, who had taken the form of a horse to escape the gaze of his wife Rhea. His mother, Philyra, was a nymph of gentle spirit. When she saw what she had borne, a creature half human, half beast, she recoiled in sorrow. But the gods, pitying the child, gave him a gift to balance his curse, knowledge beyond measure. Chiron grew into a being of calm intellect and boundless compassion. He learned from the gods themselves, medicine from Apollo, prophecy from Artemis, music from the Muses. His cave on Mount Pelion became a sanctuary for heroes in their youth. Achilles, Jason, Theseus, Heracles, and even Asclepius, the future god of healing. To each, he taught not only the arts of war, but the balance of spirit, the value of restraint, and the cost of glory. He was, as one poet wrote, the mind of a man in the body of a beast, teaching mortals how to be more divine. But even wisdom cannot protect one from fate. One day, while hosting his fellow centaurs, Chiron found himself caught in the chaos of their tempers. Heracles, one of his former pupils, arrived seeking wine. The centaurs, in their usual frenzy, demanded it all for themselves. In the fight that followed, Heracles drew his bow, the same bow dipped in the blood of the Hydra, whose poison killed with no cure. Arrows flew wildly through the dark, and fate as always found its mark. One of them struck Chiron. He cried out, more in shock than pain. His immortal blood flowed thick and dark, carrying the venom of the Hydra through his veins. Chiron, the great healer, knew instantly what it meant. He could not die, immortality forbade it, but the poison ensured he could not live without agony. Days turned to weeks, and still the pain burned, unending and absolute. He withdrew to his cave, unable to teach, unable even to sleep. His students, one by one, came to see him, heroes who owed him everything, powerless to save the one who had saved them all. It was Heracles who could not bear the guilt. He searched the earth for a cure, but there was none. In the end, he went to Zeus himself, and begged for mercy, not for his own crime, but for his teacher's suffering. Zeus listened, as gods rarely did. A bargain was struck. At that time, Prometheus, the Titan who had stolen fire for mankind, still hung in chains, his liver torn daily by an eagle as punishment. The fates had decreed that Prometheus could only be freed if an immortal willingly took his place in death. And so, Chiron, noble even in despair, offered himself. He would surrender the immortality that had become his curse, so that another might go free. Zeus accepted. The chains fell from Prometheus, and Chiron's agony ended at last. But the gods, moved by his sacrifice, would not let him fade completely. They placed his image among the stars, half man, half horse, eternally drawing his bow toward the heavens. Some said his arrow aims at the heart of Scorpio, the creature of death and vengeance, as if forever challenging darkness with light. To the ancient Greeks, Sagittarius was more than a constellation. It was the sign of the teacher, the wanderer, the philosopher. Those born beneath it, they said, carried Chiron's restless spirit searching for truth, guided by curiosity, but burdened by wounds the world could not always see. The symbol of the centaur, half human, half beast, reminds us that wisdom often grows from the struggle between our higher nature and our primal desires. Even in astrology, Sagittarius stands for the quest, not for gold or power, but for meaning. It is the sign that asks, why? Why do we suffer? Why do we seek? Why? In a universe so vast, do we still believe our stories matter? The answer, perhaps, lies in Chiron's own journey. He did not become a constellation because he was perfect. He became one because he endured, because he transformed pain into purpose and loss into legacy. On clear winter nights, you can still see him bow drawn, eyes fixed, arrow ready, a reminder that wisdom and suffering often walk hand in hand, and that the stars themselves were once wounded souls seeking peace. And just beyond his arrow's path lies another constellation, the fierce outline of a sea-goat, ancient and strange. The next story belongs to Capricorn, the creature who escaped a monster by leaping into the sea, half fish, half goat, forever caught between two worlds. In the chill of deep winter, when the days are short and the stars burn clear, a strange figure rises low along the horizon, a creature, half goat, half fish. Its hooves dissolve into a scaled tail that curls through the darkness like a wave. This is Capricorn, the sea goat, one of the oldest constellations known to humankind, older even than most of the Olympians themselves. To some, it marks ambition and endurance. But to the ancients, it told a story not of triumph, but of fear of a god who fled in panic, and in doing so, became eternal. The story begins not in the sea, but on the solid ground of Mount Olympus, in a time of terror. The great monster Typhon had risen from the earth, a being so vast that even the gods trembled. He was said to be taller than mountains, his arms stretching from east to west, his fingers ending in serpents. His body crackled with storm and fire, and his eyes glowed like molten iron. He was born from Gaia and Tartarus, vengeance made flesh, sent to overthrow Zeus and end the reign of the Olympians. When Typhon appeared, the sky itself screamed. The winds turned black, the rivers boiled, and Olympus shook to its core. The gods had faced monsters before, serpents, giants, titans, but never anything like this. Even Zeus, whose lightning had humbled worlds, hesitated. And in that moment of chaos, one god panicked. That god was Pan, the wild one, the horned god of shepherds, flocks, and the laughter of the hills. He was not a warrior like Aries, nor a strategist like Athena. He was the spirit of nature itself, cheerful, rustic, and content among the reeds. But when Typhon's shadow fell across the mountains, even Pan's laughter died. He ran. He ran faster than the wind, his hooves striking sparks from the rocks as he fled. Down from Olympus he dashed, past the valleys and forests he had once protected, until he reached the river Nile. The ground shook behind him. Typhon's roar tore the air apart. There was no time to think. So Pan did what came naturally to him. He leapt. In his panic, he tried to transform himself, as many gods could. But fear has a way of ruining even divine plans. As he dived into the water, only half the spell took hold. The upper half of his body, horns, beard, and all remained a goat. But below the waist, his legs melted into the shimmering scales of a fish. He plunged beneath the river, vanishing from sight just as Typhon's hand crashed down above him. It must have looked absurd, a god of laughter and music transformed into something caught between land and sea, survival and surrender. But the universe has a way of preserving its accidents. Zeus, grateful that Pan had later helped warn him of Typhon's ambush, decided to honor that strange act of desperation. He placed Pan's fish-goat form in the heavens, where it would forever curve between the stars of Sagittarius and Aquarius, half above the water, half below. The story could have ended there, a comical tale of divine panic frozen into myth. But Capricorn's meaning grew deeper over time, as all myths do, because Pan, despite his fear, did not abandon Olympus completely. When Zeus later confronted Typhon again, it was Pan who devised a plan to help him win. Using his pipes, he created a terrifying noise, the first panic, the echo of his own terror, that confused and scattered the monster long enough for Zeus to strike. In that way, Pan's fear became his strength, and what once shamed him became a weapon of survival. The Babylonians, long before Greece, had told a similar story. To them, the sea-goat was Ea, also known as Enki, the god of wisdom, and the waters beneath the earth. Ea, too, was a creature of two worlds, a being who brought life from the sea to the land. He symbolized not fear, but adaptability, the power to flow where one must, to survive by changing shape. When the Greeks inherited his image, they gave it new color, a touch of humor and humanity. Capricorn, then, became a paradox, the sign of ambition born from fear, the emblem of endurance born from retreat. Those born beneath its stars, astrologers would later say, carry that same contradiction. They are steady and determined, yet haunted by old anxieties, always climbing, always cautious, as if some ancient monster might still be following behind. But perhaps that's what makes Capricorn one of the most human of the Zodiac's creatures. Every person, in some way, knows what it is to run to face something so vast and terrible that the only choice is to dive into whatever safety we can find, even if it means becoming something new in the process. And maybe that's the quiet wisdom hidden in the sea-goat shape. Sometimes fear isn't failure. Sometimes it's transformation. The same panic that sent Pan diving into the Nile also gave birth to a symbol that's endured for thousands of years. To hide from the monster was not cowardice, it was instinct, survival, the raw pulse of life refusing to be destroyed. So when you see Capricorn rising, that faint figure straddling water and sky, remember Pan. Remember that even gods can panic. That courage is not the absence of fear, but what grows after it. And that, in the long memory of the stars, even a frightened leap can echo forever. High above, Capricorn's tail flickers next to another constellation, a slender youth pouring water from a vessel, its stream flowing endlessly through the heavens. The ancients said It was not rain that he poured, but ambrosia, the drink of the gods. His story is next, the tale of Aquarius, the cupbearer of Olympus, who traded his mortal life for eternal service. Above the winter horizon, pouring an endless stream of stars, stands Aquarius, the water-bearer. His vessel tilts toward the earth, spilling silver light that the ancients once imagined as the life-giving rains. But behind that serene image lies a story of longing and captivity of a mortal youth whose beauty caught the attention of Zeus himself, and whose destiny was rewritten among the clouds. His name was Ganymede. In the days when gods still walked among mortals, Ganymede lived in Troy, long before its wars and tragedies. He was the youngest son of King Tros, from whom the city would later take its name. Though royal blood ran in his veins, Ganymede's true gift was not power or wisdom, it was beauty. The poet said his face outshone dawn itself. His eyes were like clear water, his movements as graceful as the wind that runs through tall grass. One afternoon, while tending his father's flocks upon the slopes of Mount Ida, Ganymede paused to rest. The air was warm and soft, the grass silvered with sunlight. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured faintly not the storm's threat, but something almost like curiosity. From that cloud came Zeus. The king of gods had watched the boy for some time, enchanted by his lightness, by that rare mortal radiance that seemed untouched by the earth's dust. Taking the form of a great eagle, Zeus descended in a rush of wind and golden feathers. Before Ganymede could cry out, the eagle's talons closed gently, not cruelly, but with the unyielding grip of destiny. The shepherds on the hillside looked up just in time to see the boy lifted into the sky, his crimson cloak fluttering like a flame against the sun. It was one of mythology's most haunting abductions, not born of rage or punishment, but of divine desire. In Olympus, Ganymede was received with wonder. The gods themselves were startled not only by his beauty, but by Zeus's devotion. Hera, queen of the heavens, was less amused. To her, this mortal child was a rival, a living reminder of her husband's endless betrayals. But Zeus, as always, was immovable once his will was set. He granted Ganymede immortality, youth eternal, and gave him the role of cupbearer, replacing the goddess Hebe, who had once served ambrosia and nectar to the divine. The position was sacred. To pour the drink of the gods was to share in their eternity. Yet to Ganymede, it was also a gilded cage. Imagine being mortal, one moment free, sun-warmed, surrounded by familiar voices, and the next, trapped in endless perfection, where no one grows old, no one leaves, and every smile hides a spark of envy. He was adored, but not understood. In some tellings, Ganymede's sorrow moved Zeus to compassion. The god, realizing what he had stolen, placed a portion of the boy's spirit among the stars as Aquarius, so he could forever pour the rains upon the world he had left behind. Others say that the constellation is his eternal duty, that even as he serves nectar to the gods, his reflection on earth brings the storms of spring and the renewal of life. Either way, his image endured a youth eternally in motion, pouring, giving, connecting heaven and earth through an endless flow. The story of Ganymede is older than Greece. The Babylonians saw in those same stars the god Ea, pouring life-giving waters to the land. The Egyptians saw Hapi, the spirit of the Nile's flood. Across cultures, the water-bearer was a symbol of renewal, but the Greeks added something uniquely human, the tension between freedom and favour. For astrologers, Aquarius came to represent independence and idealism, the impulse to serve humanity while remaining detached from it. Just like Ganymede, those under its sign are said to carry both compassion and distance, pouring their gifts freely, yet always feeling somehow apart from those they serve. In Ganymede's story, beauty and sorrow intertwine. His ascension was glorious, but it cost him the warmth of the mortal world, his father's embrace, the scent of rain on grass, the laughter of shepherds in the hills. Yet perhaps there's a strange comfort in his fate too, for in his endless task he became a bridge between gods and men, sky and soil, eternity and time. Zeus, for all his flaws, honoured the boy's legacy. He sent to Troy, a sign of reconciliation, 2 immortal horses, swift as the wind, gifts for King Tros, to soothe the pain of his son's loss. And though Ganymede never returned to earth, the rains that fell each year were said to be his blessing, the sky's way of remembering where he came from. In every culture that followed, Aquarius remained the symbol of renewal, not just the water that nourishes crops, but the unseen flow that nourishes the spirit. It is the reminder that to give endlessly, as Ganymede does, is both a blessing and a burden. When the sky is heavy with clouds and the world smells of wet soil, it's easy to imagine him there, still the eternal cupbearer, gentle and sad, pouring life into the earth he once called home. And when the rains fade, another constellation rises in their place, 2 small fish, forever swimming side by side through the sea of stars. Their story, soft and swift as rippling water, belongs to Pisces, the last of the Zodiac's circle, and the ones who saved the goddess of love herself. Far across the sky, where winter gives way to spring, 2 shimmering fish swim side by side, bound together by a delicate thread of starlight. They are Pisces, the last sign of the Zodiac, soft, elusive, and endlessly drifting. To most, they seem peaceful, almost dreamlike. But their story begins in chaos, when the gods themselves fled in fear, and love nearly vanished from the world forever. Long ago, when the earth was still young and Olympus newly risen, there came a day when Typhon, that monstrous child of Gaia and Tartarus, returned. You might remember him from Capricorn's tale, the creature who once hurled mountains, whose breath was fire and whose voice could shake the stars. Though Zeus had struck him down before, the monster had not been entirely destroyed. Like every great fear, he slept for a time waiting. And then, one day, he woke. The sky blackened without warning. The winds screamed, and the rivers turned backward. Typhon rose from the underworld again, taller than clouds, his 100 serpent heads flickering with flame. His return sent the gods into panic. Mountains cracked, temples crumbled, and the mortals below fell to their knees, praying that someone, anyone, might stop what was coming. But even the gods can be afraid. From Olympus, the immortals scattered. Athena fled to Egypt. Hermes vanished into the winds. Apollo turned himself into a crow, and Aries became a wild boar. In every direction, divine shapes transformed into beasts of land, sky, and sea, each one desperate to survive the storm that had no mercy. And among those fleeing gods were 2 who should never have known fear, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and her son Eros, the winged god of desire. The 2 had been resting near the river's edge when the sky went dark. The air itself seemed to tremble with Typhon's roar. Trees bent like reeds, the ground split open. Aphrodite, who had charmed even war itself into stillness, suddenly felt something ancient stir in her chest, the primal terror of being unmade. She grabbed her son's hand and ran, barefoot across the trembling earth, her golden hair streaming like fire behind her. But there was nowhere left to run. Typhon's shadow fell across the river, vast and terrible. His eyes glowed like molten iron. his serpentine arms stretched toward them, ready to crush. In that moment, Aphrodite looked to the water cold, dark, and deep, and made her choice. She leapt. As she and Eros plunged into the river, the two gods transformed. Their bodies shrank, their limbs blurred, and the light of divinity dimmed beneath scales. Where moments before stood the goddess of love and the god of desire, now swam two small fish, pale and swift, darting through the current like living stars. They swam hard, tails flicking through the murky depths, their eyes reflecting flashes of lightning from above. Typhon's roars thundered across the surface, but the river carried them far away, winding through reeds and under moonlight, until the storm faded and the world grew quiet again. When the danger passed, the gods slowly returned to their true forms, each climbing from their hiding places with sheepish relief. Aphrodite, too, rose from the riverbank, Eros by her side, both wet, trembling, but alive. The other gods laughed, teasing her for fleeing like a mortal. But Zeus silenced them, for even he knew that survival is sometimes the greatest courage of all. To honour the two fish who had guided her through the depths, Aphrodite placed their images among the stars side by side, forever bound by a silver cord so they would never drift apart. And thus the constellation Pisces was born, two souls moving in harmony through the endless sea of night. But Pisces is not just a story of escape. It is, in its quiet way, a story about devotion of love that refuses to be lost, even when the world collapses around it. The fish of Pisces remind us that even the smallest creatures can carry something divine, and that sometimes the gentlest paths, the ones that flow with the current instead of fighting it, are the ones that save us. In astrology, Pisces became the sign of empathy and imagination, of dreamers and healers. Those born under its stars are said to feel everything, the joy and pain of others, the quiet ache beneath the noise of the world. They move through life like water-sensitive, reflective, and hard to contain. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? That the final sign of the zodiac, the one that closes the great celestial circle, is also the most fluid, the most selfless. In a way, Pisces represents the end of the journey, the point where ego dissolves and all things merge into something larger, quieter, infinite. The two fish swim endlessly across the sky, their silver thread glinting faintly against the black. One leads, the other follows, and together they form a loop, a symbol of the eternal dance between love and fear, escape and return, life and rebirth. And somewhere, perhaps, Aphrodite still looks up at those stars and remembers the river, the cold rush of water, and the warmth of her son's hand in hers, the moment love itself took the shape of something fragile but enduring. As winter fades and the waters of Pisces begin to set, another figure rises just behind them, tall, robed, and holding a serpent coiled around his arm. His name has been almost forgotten, erased from the circle of the zodiac, yet he, too, has a story, one of healing, defiance, and the hidden 13th sign that winds between the rest. His constellation is Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, the healer who once dared to challenge death itself. Between Scorpio and Sagittarius, where few stargazers think to look, lies a constellation most people have never heard of. It winds through the Milky Way in a shimmer of faint coiling light, a man holding a great serpent in both hands. His name is Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. Today, he is forgotten, by most left out of the 12 familiar signs that circle our calendars and shape our horoscopes. Yet his constellation is real, older than many of the others, and his story may be one of the most unsettling in the heavens. Because Ophiuchus was a healer so skilled so daring that he dared to undo the work of death itself, and for that the gods struck his name from the sky. The story begins, as so many do, with a student of Chiron. You might remember the wise centaur, the teacher of heroes, wounded by his own arrow and lifted to the stars as Sagittarius. Among his pupils was a man named Asclepius, son of Apollo and the mortal princess Coronis. Even before his birth, Asclepius's story carried the mark of tragedy. His mother, Coronis, betrayed Apollo's love and was struck down for it. Yet as her body burned on the pyre, Apollo, overcome with regret, snatched the infant from her womb and carried him to Chiron's cave. There the child grew strong and gentle, gifted with a mind as sharp as a blade and a heart attuned to every trembling pulse of life. Under Chiron's tutelage, Asclepius learned the language of herbs, the secrets of surgery, the patterns of stars that governed disease and healing. He became a physician unlike any before him, one who could calm pain with a touch, draw out poison with song, and mend bones as easily as if they were broken twigs. But Asclepius's genius had a shadow, curiosity. He wanted to know not only how to heal the living, but how to understand death itself. And one day he was given the chance. While gathering herbs in a glade, Asclepius saw two serpents entwined in combat. One struck, the other dead, then slithered away, only to return moments later carrying a strange leaf in its mouth. It laid the leaf upon the fallen serpent's body, and to Asclepius's astonishment, the dead one stirred and lived. The healer fell to his knees, trembling. If such knowledge existed in the world, he thought, surely it was meant to be known. He found the same plant, studied it, and with Apollo's light guiding him, he learned to wield it. Soon, stories spread, the healer who could wake the dead. At first, it was a miracle. Parents rejoiced, lovers wept with joy, kings offered fortunes, but the underworld grew restless. The balance of things had been broken, souls that belonged to Hades were being reclaimed by mortals. The gods began to argue. Hera saw arrogance. Hades saw theft. Even Apollo, proud as he was of his son, began to worry. When Zeus finally learned of it, the decision was swift. Death, he decreed, was sacred. Without it, the order of the world would collapse. So one night, as Asclepius bent over another lifeless form, perhaps a child, perhaps a hero, Zeus hurled a bolt of lightning that split the ground in two. The healer was gone. The people mourned. Apollo raged, cursing the heavens. But Zeus, perhaps out of pity, perhaps out of respect, placed Asclepius's image among the stars not as punishment, but as warning. There he stands still, holding the serpent that had first revealed death's secret to him. The serpent, of course, was no mere symbol. In every ancient culture, it represented renewal, the shedding of old skin, the cycle of life and decay. Asclepius's serpent became a mark of medicine itself, coiled around the staff that doctors still carry today. It's a quiet echo of his power, not to defy death, but to respect the thin line between life and what lies beyond. And yet, despite his place in the heavens, the Greeks and Romans never made Ophiuchus one of the Zodiac's 12. Perhaps it was superstition. 12 was sacred, balanced, complete. 13 was chaos, an unlucky number, a reminder of the day the healer dared too much. So Ophiuchus was left unnamed in the circle, slipping silently between Scorpio's sting and Sagittarius's arrow, like a secret the stars themselves agreed to keep. Astrologers who do include him, and there are a few, say that Ophiuchus' souls are born between November 29 and December 17. They are curious, magnetic, and defiant, drawn to hidden truths, unafraid of breaking rules that bind others. In them burns the same fire that drove Asclepius, the hunger to mend what others say cannot be fixed, even at great cost. But whether you believe in signs or only in stories, Ophiuchus lingers as something more profound a question. How much power is too much? When does healing become hubris? And what happens when compassion reaches beyond the laws that hold the world together? The serpent-bearer's stars are faint but steady. They cross the sky each summer, between the scorpion's tail and the centaur's bow, a quiet bridge between death and wisdom, life and the limits of mercy. If you trace his outline carefully, you can almost see him still, the healer who would not accept the final word, the man erased from the zodiac, but not from the heavens. His serpent coils around his arms like a reminder, or perhaps a promise, that what is forgotten is never truly gone. Soon, though, the serpent-bearer will sink below the horizon, and the circle of the zodiac will close once more. But before we end our long journey through these living myths of the stars, one last truth remains: that every god, beast, and constellation from Aries' ram to Pisces' fish is part of a greater story, a map of memory, pain, and wonder stretched across the sky. And in that endless pattern, the night itself remembers. Above the sleeping world, where silence hums and the cold breath of eternity drifts between the stars, every light is a memory. Some burn fiercely heroes who defied fate. Others shimmer faintly, like the quiet souls who simply loved, or tried, or fell. But none are ever truly gone, because the sky remembers. Long before astronomers charted coordinates or gave constellations numbers and Greek letters, these same patterns were stories. Each star was a word, each constellation a sentence written by time itself. The heavens were a vast, unfolding scripture, not of science, but of meaning. Humanity looked up and saw its reflection: courage and cruelty, desire and loss, laughter and ruin. Consider Aries, whose golden fleece once carried children away from suffering, now frozen mid-flight, forever caught between escape and salvation. Or Gemini, where twin brothers still hold hands through eternity, proof that even death cannot separate true devotion. Their stars rise and fall together every night, an endless rhythm of reunion and parting. In the lion's fierce heart of Leo, Hercules' triumph gleams, but so does the shadow of the creature that once roared against gods. Even monsters were remembered, not erased. Because to the ancients, the heavens were not a temple of perfection, they were a record of everything. Victory and tragedy shared the same sky. The stars do not take sides. They remember all. Virgo, once the goddess of harvest and innocence, still gazes down upon the world she abandoned. Her light is soft, wistful, not a reproach, but a longing. She reminds us that purity, once lost, can still illuminate from afar. Libra's scales hang suspended, unbalanced, yet eternal the universe itself, pausing in judgment. Scorpio lies coiled nearby, a glint of warning that justice always carries teeth. And above them, Sagittarius aims his arrow not at prey, but at the horizon, at infinity itself, as if chasing the next great mystery. And then there is Ophiuchus, the constellation erased, but never gone. His serpent twists quietly through the Milky Way, whispering that some truths cannot be buried. The serpent-bearer stands as a ghost of rebellion, a reminder that even forgotten names can leave indelible marks on the cosmos. For every constellation is a wound made holy. The ancients believed that when a being mortal or divine reached the end of their story, their essence rose upward, burning into a new form. Death was never an ending, only translation. the sea foam that birthed Aphrodite. The tears of Orion's lovers turned to starlight, the sparks of Zeus's lightning becoming suns. Even Pisces, the humble fish who once carried love itself to safety, glides across the heavens as if swimming through memory. They remind us that salvation need not roar, sometimes it simply endures. And perhaps that is the truest myth of all, not that the stars tell our fates, but that they remember us. Every time we lift our eyes to them, we awaken something ancient. The constellations shift slightly each year, a slow celestial heartbeat, yet their stories survive. Not because the gods demand it, but because humans cannot bear to forget. We keep them alive in whispers, art, songs, and the quiet murmur of bedtime stories passed through millennia. When sailors lost their way, they followed these old myths home. When poets lost their hope, they wrote of their glimmer. When lovers lay under the same dark sky, they swore their promises by the same eternal lights. And though our modern world has mapped and measured every star, we still cannot name the longing that stirs when we see them. Perhaps that is what endures not belief, but recognition. The sense that we, too, are written somewhere in the dark. For what are we, if not another story waiting to be placed among the stars? Someday, when this world fades and the constellations drift into new forms, their myths will have changed again, yet the essence will remain. Heroes, monsters, gods, lovers, the eternal shapes of the human heart. The sky is not merely a mirror of the past. It is a memory of everything that ever mattered. So when you look up tonight, whether you see Aries or Orion, Virgo or Ophiuchus, remember that you are not only gazing at ancient light, you are gazing at memory itself. Because the sky never forgets. It holds every story, every sacrifice, every name, and as long as even one human being still looks up in wonder, the stars will go on whispering their truths across the void, reminding us that though the gods have faded, their echoes still shimmer above us, eternal and alive. The sky remembers,